For example, I know of a professor who, and I will not name the university, who describes her sexual orientation as cross species. So she's cross species attracted, and she actually is promotes this even in the classroom. And I've talked with students and other professors to confirm this. And to her, to use that term bestiality is an offensive term, and that's where morality comes in. How can it be that some things are actually wrong and not just wrong because I think so? And are there no moral laws? Because if there are no moral laws, then we can maybe reduce our morality to something we call maybe the no harm principle. And the no harm principle is huge in theories of morality and for materialistic approaches to morality. And it's essentially this: is try not to harm other people. You're free to do what you want to as long as you're not harming other people. And you see this coming up in various phrases like, if you're mutually consenting adults, you can do whatever. In this professor's case, I don't even want to go down that road, but she would argue, yes, there is clear mutual consent. It's not in human language necessarily, but in the relationship. And I won't even explain what animals she particularly uses. So the bottom line is that what is this? Are there any moral standards at all? If there are not, then we are in serious trouble as a culture, because history tells us that the pendulum swings from one extreme eventually to the other extreme. And when it reaches the extremes, often a lot of people die, and we don't want that. So are there some moral laws? So in thinking about this, we would first of all think, and our culture very much is trending this way, is that we make up our own moral rules as individuals, as long as we observe the no harm principle. We're not harming other people. So you can do anything you want. You are ultimate God of your own life, so to speak, and you are the one who defines morally right and morally wrong. But there's a problem with that, and that is, it's also, the problem is, as I say, that kind of morality is like, let's say, it's blind to future consequences of present day decisions. So if you're making up your own moral rules and you say, this is okay because I'm not going to be harming anybody, the reality is that every action and every decision we make in this life leads to an exponentially increasing number of consequences. And those consequences affect the future and an exponentially increasing number of people in the future. And so what seems to be okay today for an individual to do, because they say it's not harming anybody, can actually produce enormous harm in the future. And we're totally blind to that. We only have hindsight. We don't have foresight. So that's one of the issues. The other issue is with making up our own morality, is that it's kind of like there's photographs of some amazing hiking trails. I think, I'm not sure what country they're in, but they're on basically cliff faces, that the cliff face is almost sheer. And there's a little path that goes around the edge of the cliff face. And of course, there's a guardrail along that path, because that path is like, we're talking, hardly wide enough for your shoulders. And thousands of tourists go on this path every year. It's a really big tourist attraction, judging from the photos I've seen and the videos I've seen of these amazing pathways on sheer cliff faces. Pretty sure here in Canada, they would not get the stamp of approval from the government as following all the building code or whatever. But other countries have different building codes or different safety codes. As I found out from personal experience in other countries, I can do things in other countries that are perfectly fine, even though they're extremely dangerous. Whereas in Canada, they want to keep you from hurting yourself accidentally. But anyways, the problem with morality that we just make up ourselves, it's kind of like, if you imagine that the precipice is where things really go bad, the guardrail is the moral code that keeps you from going over the moral precipice. But the problem with making up your own rules is that you basically, You don't like where the guardrail is anchored to the bedrock. You don't like that idea because it never moves. It's immovable. It might inhibit you from who knows what. It gives you a sense of being confinement or whatever. So you carry the guardrail yourself. So instead of having a guardrail anchored to the edge of that path running along the cliff, they hand out a little guardrail, maybe this long to each tourist, and you carry that along. And that way you can have that guardrail wherever you want, but that's totally useless. It fails to keep you from wandering over the precipice, over the moral precipice. And that's what we see in history when societies and individuals make up their own rules, because there is the trends, the fads, the pendulum, the swing of the pendulums. And that's one of the issues. The other issue is you can never say to somebody else, that's wrong. Like, for example, let's say somebody murders somebody else. You would say, an innocent person, you would say, well, that's wrong. In fact, you might even go further and say that violates the no harm principle. But the guy who did the perpetrator might say, I don't abide by the no harm principle. That's your principle. That's not mine. And there are people who do terrible things in this world, terrible things, with regard to human trafficking and how they abuse other individuals. It could be any number of ways. And they actually like to do that. And they could care less about the no harm principle. So if you're going to say that's actually wrong, you're going to have to appeal to a higher moral standard than the individual, than us individually making up the rules. And that's where you might want to go with the social contract. You say, well, we have a social contract here and it's violating that. And again, they might say, why should I feel morally obligated to live by the social contract of my culture?
Yeah, because even when you talk about that, that's a social contract that, unless you're immigrating into a culture, there's nothing you have to sign to agree to that.
No. Furthermore, you look at what change has happened in our culture over the last, say, 5 decades. If it was wrong to violate the social contract, then every activist would be morally wrong. Anybody clamoring for change, even if they said this is unjust, they'd say, no, that's not unjust. That's the social contract. So there was a time, for example, when it was a criminal offense to perform an abortion. Now it's totally the opposite. And why was that? The social contract was changed. And that goes for anything at all. So some things people would say it's good to be able to change the social contract on some things, but not on others. And again, on what basis? Okay, maybe it is good. And I would agree. Let's say abolishing slavery in England back in the 1800s. Slavery was accepted. That was part of the culture. And then suddenly some people start having problems with that. They start going against the flow. They start saying this should not be part of the social contract, and eventually change that. And I would say that's good. I'm glad they did that. But the moment I say that part of that social contract was wrong, I'm comparing the social contract with an even higher standard still that transcends social contracts. And I'm saying this social contract has a problem with it. We need to change that to a better one. And the moment I use the word better, I'm appealing to a higher standard still. So the point being, even culture itself does not define ultimate moral values.